Hey guys, wanted to do a video that's a little different, or a different set of knives that I want to discuss. You've possibly seen me posting up a bunch of pictures of these, some short overview videos of these Soviet, or pretty early, I would say, Soviet-era military knives. So I just wanted to put them all together and talk about them a little bit, about their history, and yeah, just a little more in detail. So it starts with this little guy. Or not that little, but super light and slim. This knife started it all for the Soviet military, I would say. So in the late 20s, the Russian military was very impressed with the with Finnish knives when they were engaged in that conflict, and Russian military was not the best in terms of having the right tools, the right equipment, and so they decided they would borrow some of the ideas. They really liked the traditional Puko knives, but to make it more military grade, they actually based this off of the Martini, I think, Scout. It was intended for scouts, obviously, and kind of had, a guard like this, like an S-shaped guard on it. And general shape was similar to this. It had, I believe, a fuller. If you look it up online, you can find pictures of them. Yeah, so the blades, more of a flat or hollow ground, not your traditional Scandi. But anyway, 1930, I believe this guy came out and became an instant hit. They called it the Finka. Finnish knife in Russian, yeah, I mean there are other knives that continue to be produced in the Soviet Union that were more Finnish traditional type knives, but this kind of got the name, and everybody always thinks of these when you say a Finn knife. Anyway, so this design is pretty close to being a replica of the original, other than the steel probably. So I think some of the originals actually had an antler handle, kind of the same shape, definitely same size. You can see kind of how big that blade is. Anyway, so yeah, this blade is the Russian D2 equivalent, and it's got that modern kind of acid stone wash type of thing going. But, oh, and has the NKVD, the precursor to KGB logo here. They were the biggest customer of these, not really officially, but funny because the Russian criminal underground found out and really loved them, and actually these became the most widely used in the criminal circles because they were so effective and they were so light and small, thin, easily tucked away. So much so that the Soviet Union had to specifically ban these types of knives for the longest time. But anyway, so what they look like is this. Hidden tank construction, obviously. The S-guard, the more traditional guard, the original guard, is like on this one here. A little simpler version. Also Russian D2 equivalent. The H12 MF. You can see this is what the guard actually looked like. Still that S-type, but it's got that little, I don't even know what to call that, clamped down side for the thumb. But yeah, same general shape. What else can I say about these? So these have been popular ever since. Huge resurrection for them now happening in Russia. You can buy them from all kinds of makers. It's hard to tell, who's they're all about the same price. I like them a lot. I've tested them a little bit out. They're very versatile, even despite the thin blade profile, which they do to avoid being classified as a weapon these days. So you can see the blades are quite thin. Nevertheless, they're quite usable. Will cut through a whole lot of stuff easily. Yeah, so they can be your utility knife. Anyway, so let's talk about the military side of things. Oh, and the sheath looks, I mean, the original didn't look like that probably, but the new ones all kind of come with these button, flat button with a belt loop. All right, so what then happened was in 1940, the Russian military, anticipating a bigger conflict, developed a full-scale military knife. So instead of sort of the KGB types, this is front lines type of weapon that was developed. And it was based on the same general idea. Has a much more pronounced clip though. They swapped the orientation of the S-guard, as you can see, for the military type of grip. So stab up, right, or cut down, cut towards yourself kind of combat grips. That was in the Soviet military manual at the time. This is what they taught for knife combat, and that's what the knives were built for. Here's a modern interpretation of that, but pretty close to the original. Actually, the lines are quite close if you find pictures of the originals. Very simple wood handle, simple brass bolster and guard. And this one again has the same D2 type of blade. Mirror finish, the originals were not, didn't look quite as nice, but very light. Again, the original had a thicker blade. This one is again kind of very thin, but super aggressive, super easy to use. Handle is long enough to be useful in different grips. So even though the guard has that funny shape and doesn't really lend itself to this, you can do a lot. You can hold it like this, and it's not dangerous because of the guard. Yeah, so anyway, I found it really useful around the house. I cut up boxes with this now because it cuts through cardboard better than anything else I have. And I have a lot of knives that cut cardboard really well. And the sheath. Sheath for this, actually the originals came with these really cheapo, terrible wooden sheaths that were no good. A few of them survived. The new ones come with your basic kind of dangler or just a basic belt loop. Again, this is the typical button holder here. Here's a little different interpretation. So a more modern interpretation has the fuller, same as on the original knife. Still the same S-guard as you can see. Again, very pronounced clip point, even more so on the new one here than the original. Handle has been modified, so these guys make a simpler, smaller, shorter, kind of sturdier handle. Again, blade nice and thin to avoid being classified as a weapon right now. This guy is actual D2, and this one is again an amazing knife. Tested it out, really works, feels super solid. Oh yeah, and it has a lanyard hole here as well. Okay, so anyway, that's where that went. In 43 though, this came out. Let's see this again. Oh, similar, so I'm not going to talk about those much, but this was the most lasting Russian military, Soviet military knife probably. From 43 all the way to, I mean, I think they might even still be in use now, but definitely through the 80s. Again, the original would have been a little thicker, sturdier, but the idea was it was super light, super simple. They went with the handle that you typically see on like K-bars and such, right? Rubber plastic hybrid handle. Feels actually really nice in the hand, grippy, soft. It's great for my smaller size hands, so don't know how it would work for bigger hands, but anyway, it's got that pommel, it's got the bolt. This one's filled with epoxy on the insides because that helps it keep together. Some people do make them still so that you can take it apart, but with the with the lighter blade that's required to not be classified as a weapon again, that's kind of prone to breakage. So Anyway, again, same steel. This one has the non-reflective bead blast on it. The originals did not, but so in 1943, these guys came out, were an instant success. A lot of the Russian military on the front lines switched to these, used them. And yeah, it is, if you get your hands on one, you can see why it's such a versatile military knife, because it's so easy in any type of grip, right? Natural, whichever way, it doesn't have a defined direction. This little guard is all you need. It's big enough to really guard your hands against anything. So whether you are trying to, go blade out, blade up, cut, blade in like the other one, it all works. You can use the pommel for blunt attacks or for some work, right, as a hammer or something. I'm sure the original with a thicker blade would be useful for prying and such. I wouldn't pry with this one, but cuts really well. It's sharp as a razor. Anyway, so a little bit about, that was mostly history. Let me talk a little bit about sort of where you get these and what they look like. For example, this is actually feeling a lot more solid and heavier than this guy. This guy, paper thin, paperweight, quite usable. I've tested it out, cut through wood, cuts through anything pretty much, but doesn't feel very substantial. Feels very comfortable, not super substantial. This really, really is a knife that can be used every day. Hard used, abused. I mean, these guys do some crazy testing on them too. The way I actually ended up choosing knives to order from specific makers was looking for some people, obviously like better pictures that they post on Instagram, trying to see who makes their own instead of reselling, although not 100% sure about this one. Big plus is if you can see their manufacturing videos and some of the testing they do, like these guys. These guys too, actually. This one is truer to the original, like I said, but doesn't feel quite as solid. Wouldn't take as much abuse as this guy. But the blade is, again, they do some crazy testing on their blades too, so they will stand up. But yeah, so you can do some due diligence. You can look at them. They all kind of fall in that $100 to $150, maybe, about that range, even with shipping to the US. What else do I want to say about these? So they're made, some are mass produced. So the originals, the originals were produced in two places. Zlatoust, it's a city in the Ural Mountains. And so that, a lot of production was there, especially during the war, because that's where a lot of the people were evacuated. Half of my family ended up in that general area. So, these guys these days mostly come actually from a place called Pavlovo or Vorsma. They had old factories there, even pre-Soviet times, and then all that got reshuffled and such. But yeah, they had a lot of work done there, and the resurgence is really coming from a lot of small makers building up their own businesses there these days. In fact, there's so many, it's really hard to judge who's doing good work and who's just going along for the ride. But generally, I think they all have, you will have a much better bet going with one of those than with the something like AIR, the modern day big factory makers, or Kislar. They make, usually will make a batch. It depends on the maker. These guys I bought directly from the makers. They will have like a small shop with a few people making them, and they will generally do batches of anything from 3 to maybe sometimes they'll do as many as 10 or 15 at a time. But it's not factory. It's a small production, handmade, hand finished. I mean, they're pretty simple. So. But they're not standby, some big machines somewhere. The blades are all hand forged. Well, I don't know how much, what the exact process is, but it's all forged steel. So anyway, the only other thing I think I would say is you can do different finishes these days, obviously, right? Kind of matte satin on this one, and the mirror polish, and there's all the same steel, by the way, and sort of your I don't know, black wash, whatever you want to call this one. A lot of them will put, you know, engravings on them. They will do laser engraving in-house sometimes. Some of them have pommels that will have like logos on them and such, different materials for the handles. More interesting versions of some of these come in like woods type of steel. Yeah, I mean, there's a range of steels you can use, 440 equivalents and up. Generally, this is kind of, you know, the D2 type steel is kind of good balance of being cheap enough to try and being really good enough to actually then own and use. So yeah, you could go with more embellishment. Generally on the knives, not the sheath so much. The sheaths are pretty simple. I'm not even sure if they make their own or they kind of, because they all look the same. Some are a little better than others, but like you can see, two of those came from different sources with the exact same sheath. So what else do I want to say? That's about it, probably. So really interesting history of these knives. They're really well thought out. I mean, there's a reason they've been around for like almost 100 years now. I think, you know, even though, like I said, these are pretty lightened versions of the originals, I'm sure the originals weren't that bulky and heavy, so I think the general gist is kind of that.